Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here with all of you to celebrate the national study, Rebuilding Music Education in Canada Post-Pandemic. My name is Angela Elster, and I am the Vice Chair of the Coalition for Music Education in Canada. And I am joining you today from the offices of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra and the VSO School of Music. And I'd like to acknowledge that here we rehearse and we teach and play and work on the traditional ancestral unceded Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I'd like you to take just a few moments of reflective time to acknowledge the land from which you are joining us here today. This is a really exciting day for the Coalition for Music Education and all of our partners. 5 years ago, at a national roundtable, it was decided that the future of music education in Canada required an in-depth study around the health of music education from coast to coast to coast. And then 3 years ago, the study was initiated under the leadership of the principal investigator, who you will be meeting today, Dr. Adam Kahn. It goes without saying that as the pandemic closed our schools down and closed down our music and arts programming, we faced challenges we could never have imagined. Music and arts education was already facing incredible challenges prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic has magnified and heightened our concern for the future of music education in Canada. So we're here today to share with you some of the highlights of the study and together to find strategies to move music education forward and advocate for the right, the human right of all individuals to have access to quality music education. I also, on a personal note, want to say I think we all woke up today, wherever we are in the country, to the heartbreak of war and devastation. And we can't not think about those people who are being harmed today and the future of this world and this country. But for me, that increases my commitment to music and music education, because it is through music and music education that we build kindness and empathy and a way of working and solving problems together. And it's my passion to ensure that we all have that access and continue that access to music education. We're going to begin today with part 1 of the national study, an introduction to both the coalition and the study by our chair, Kirsten McLean. And Kirsten is an amazing music educator in Prince Edward Island who has been a real anchor for the coalition, has now taken the lead as the chair. We'll have a brief overview of the study and the report by Dr. Adam Kahn. And he, as I mentioned, is the principal investigator of this study, but he's also the associate professor of music education at the University of Victoria. And throughout the entire study, he was also acting associate dean at the Faculty of Fine Arts at the University of Victoria, and is an amazing expert not only in music education but choral music. It's so good to have you here, Adam. And my friend and colleague, Larry O'Farrell, who is the executive director and chair of the coalition for the Canadian Network for Arts and Learning, and is on this coalition panel as a researcher and a strong advocate for music and the arts in this country. I met Larry many decades ago, and we've worked tirelessly together to advocate for the health of music education and arts education. And And we have Dr. Betty Ann Yonker, who is supposedly on a sabbatical right now. However, she is a professor at the Don Wright Faculty of Music at Western University and recently retired dean of that faculty. But I know from personal experience that she probably hasn't had one day off since that spectacular day. So welcome to all of you, and over to part one. Kirsten.
Well, thank you, Angela, for both that wonderful introduction and for agreeing to moderate tonight's event. I am Kirsten McLean. I currently have the privilege of serving as the chair of the board for the Coalition for Music Education in Canada. The coalition was founded 30 years ago, and its purpose was to initially engage partners in music education. So music educators, industry partners, parents, students, anyone who really wanted to come together to address some of the concerns that they had about music education in Canadian schools. The coalition believes that learning music is a fundamental part of every child's education, and that every child should have access to a quality music program within their schools. We believe that success in music is equal to success in life. They are not distinct, but instead reciprocal. So we do this important work through two pillars. The first being our advocacy pillar. Under our advocacy work, we have our very well-known program, Music Monday, the first Monday in every May, when children from across Canada join together in song to celebrate the important role that music education plays in their lives and in their communities and in their schools. We have our Youth for Music program, where we seek to strengthen and support our youth as they soon become the people and the future leaders who will make decisions for music education in Canada. We have a leadership forum where we gather together leaders from various music education organizations from across Canada to work together to strengthen our resolve. And coming soon is our National Policy Summit, where under the leadership of Lynn Tucker and Dr. Eric Favreau, we're going to look at how we can affect change in policy in Canadian music education policy, Under our research pillar, I'm so excited to be here tonight to celebrate the launch of this amazing study, which is just one of several projects we have undertaken to further examine music education in Canada, and then to be able to further explore the themes that come out of them. So, as Angela alluded to, a few years ago, our then chair of the board, Dr. Eric Favreau, put forth a proposal that it was time to paint a clear picture of the current landscape in music education in Canada. Having myself personally taught in both Ontario and in Prince Edward Island, I, like many other of my music education colleagues, were already too painfully aware of the glaring discrepancies between how music education is mandated, supported, and delivered across Canada. Specifically, we wanted to recognize that there was an ongoing need for this kind of study. And so the Coalition for Music Education began to outline a process with the end goal of creating a detailed report that would reflect the current status of music education in Canada. The Coalition was the lead steering organization, but we were joined by very important partnership organizations, including the support of the Canadian Music Educators Association, Music Counts, Music Canada, People for Education, and the Canadian Network for Arts and Learning. And in addition, we also had the support of Western University and the University of Victoria. Dr. Adam Kahn, who you'll meet shortly, was then appointed our lead researcher, and with his team, they began the daunting task of gathering data and surveying music educators and school administrators from across Canada. Then in March of 2020, I think it goes without saying, but we all know the COVID-19 virus reared its ugly head and the resulting pandemic forced restrictions and the cancellation of music in many classrooms across Canada. What was already a very fragile ecosystem for Canadian music education was now further impacted and in many cases damaged by COVID-19. This study and the landscape that it was able to document before the onset of the pandemic is now much more important, much more crucial than ever before. It serves as a record of what was before COVID and is now a starting point from which we must address these glaring discrepancies and inconsistencies and begin the important process of rebuilding music education across Canada so that every student will have access to a quality music program in their schools. So I'd now like to turn it over to Dr. Adam Kahn, who's going to share with you a little more information about the study.
Thanks, Kirsten, and hello, everybody. It's good to see old and new friends, and I hope you are all well. And I think it's really important just to take a moment, huge gratitude to, especially to Eric, the former chair, and to Angela, who were there literally just supporting every step of the way and pushing every step of the way to try to get this done. It was a mammoth task, and it took a village to make this happen. So I want to thank them, especially to Betty Ann and Kyle Zavitz, and to Hector Vasquez, who also is here, I see. Thank you so much. This was a village that came together to try to make it happen, because the complexities of how music education exists in this country, talk about the elephants in the room. There are many elephants in the room. It's a giant herd. And so trying to herd elephants was an interesting conversation that we had, many conversations. And I think one of the things that we discovered was music education exists in an ecosystem, and there is never a one size fits all. So I think they asked me to speak for 5 minutes. And how do you speak 5 minutes, 3 years of your life that you devoted to this? Never forget the pandemic and everything else. It's just, how do you say it in 5 minutes? And I think what is probably the most important is what we called this, is that everything is connected, that everything has consequences. And in that process, we have to think thoughtfully and come with a good intention each time we're thinking about how music education does and doesn't have access, and what is music education really. Now that we're in this 21st century, this time of social justice, but also many things that have come to light, music education is looking quite different than it used to look like in World War II. So our paradigms, our epistemologies, if you'd like, are changing about what we think is music education, what it should look like, what people would like, and just the whole realm. And there's an ecosystem that supports that, everything from higher education, post-secondary, and the preparation of our teachers. And that came across in the survey in terms of how they felt that they were being prepared. So we looked at from the top down in terms of looking at, we hear things about systemic problems, and what we had to say, well, what are these systems? Well, there are many that govern music education. So when you read the report, you'll see, and there's no point in me kind of verbatim, but you'll see all the systems that come into play that we have to, one at a time, look at how we can make it better for what we're looking for. But I guess we have to define at some point in time what we're looking for. So we're planting seeds, and that's what this report was meant to do, is plant seeds to really initiate everybody in every province to start investigating, because if one size doesn't fit all, that means that what happens in PEI certainly is probably not what's happening in BC, and that's a wonderful thing, because diversity is important. The problem is, how do we make it so that diversity really does include everyone, or does it just include the people and the diversity that's in that particular region? So I wanted to just kind of give that overview and saying that's what the report really is about. How do you capture the world in a snowflake? And hopefully this is kind of part of that process. I'm really looking forward to conversations that will come from this, criticisms and support, comments, and how do we move forward in a good way. Probably all of you are probably tired of talking about this. I am. It's like everything else. Let's just get to action. And so more research, and then also I think advocacy with governments, because we want them on board to realize that music education really is a key of many things, to acknowledge some of the problems that we're having, but also just that sense of togetherness. And I always believe that music education, I think that's why all of us who are probably in this room are here, is that we believe that music education is that secret magic that brings us together as a collective. So that's all I have to say.
Well, I'm going to, before we move on to Betty Ann Yonker and Larry O'Farrell, I just want to add some narrative. Kirsten, your enthusiasm and dedication to music education shows in everything you do. You walk your talk in everyday life and in the music room and leading the board of the coalition. So I thank you. And Adam, your passion and thoughtfulness is woven throughout every sentence in this report. Every time I read it, your compassion, your passion, and your thoughtfulness is just so evident in everything that you have written. And I thank you both. And now it's my pleasure to pass on the baton to Dr. Betty Ann Yonker to reveal some of the main themes that emerged in this very thoughtful report.
Thank you, Angela. I'm just going to share my screen just to keep probably myself on task more than anybody else. And in case I talk too fast, you're able to still understand what I'm saying here. I also want to thank Eric and Angela, Adam, Hector, and Kyle. This was truly a collaborative venture, truly a collaborative work. And the data I will present here, the themes, is also the collaborative work with Kyle Zavitz, who worked endlessly on this stuff. And I certainly turned to him many times. He had an understanding of the data in hand when I came on board to then help out with the final writing processes. So I'll not echo what Adam said so clearly and concisely, but in terms of, we had three parts, basically. The report is in three parts. The part one is the narrative and does describe the goals and processes. A continuing motivation to advocate for equal access for music in Canada is critical, that this is but a beginning foundation for future research to continue, that the data are available, that we did identify the various systems and structures and elements that do define and support, guide the music education ecosystem. The challenges, one could say these are challenges, one could also say these are opportunities. Canada is a vast geography. We also know and have affirmed this notion of provincial autonomy over all education-based decisions. This is a Canadian thing, and therefore it's a challenge to have a national identity. And if we look at from Confederation and the foundation values of Canada, that notion of the mosaic flair of Canada is still a value today. And it is identified then in the local autonomy as at the provincial level and district level and school level of how decisions are made and when. In terms of getting to the data then, on part two, we defined the elementary, secondary, junior, intermediate levels and what they meant, because they were not consistent across the province. We also explained how minutes per week of music instruction was addressed. We based it on a sort of an 1,500 minutes of instruction that's pretty typical across the country in schools. So the first topic was funding for music programs. Who does it and how is it done? It appears to be very complex in terms of the nature of the sources. We're not sure if everyone quite understands it. We have to be cautious with that statement, however, because we need to look at the total number of those who responded to the surveys from administrators and music teachers. There seemed to be some polarized percentages, so between the administrators and the teachers, of who had autonomy over the funds or what was the source of funding. Another interesting was the same or differing answers between the administrators and music teachers. When they answered yes or no, the administrator has autonomy over funding for allocation of music instruction in schools. They were relatively consistent across teachers and administrations about whether or not the administrators had flexibility and or autonomy. Interesting to note that 1 in 3 administrators across the country do not believe they have flexibility and or autonomy to allocate funds for music education. Whether that aligned with the policy documents, again, that differed across the country. The second topic, the second large topic we looked at was the mandatory time. That is there a mandatory time indicated in policy documents and perceived at the school level by administrators and music teachers? And if so, what is the length of that time? Across the country, we are pleased to announce that yes, time is mandated at the elementary level in the policy documents and perceived that way. It's also an elective at the secondary level, and these are also aligned with policy. In terms of minutes per week, the results were reflected in mean and percentages within, as I already mentioned, that typical 1,500 minutes of overall instruction. It's noted that, and I'm just going to go to my notes here, it's noted that Manitoba reported the highest instruction at the elementary level of mandated time, and it comprised of 6.8% of total instruction time. Prince Edward Island reported the highest at the junior high level, comprising a 9.9% of instruction time. And it was also noted that only 4 provinces were categorized as the junior high: Alberta, Nova Scotia, PEI, Newfoundland. It's also noted that there were themes of flexibility, inclusivity, and efficiency that have sort of taken the front seat in policy decisions. And that's sort of evolving as we speak and meet tonight. The various implications on this notion of educational policy reform and centralization or localization. There's been recent shifts in various policies that have addressed this in terms of funding, inclusive education, and autonomy of local voices. So shifting more to the local level. This is happening in Alberta, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, Labrador. These are recent shifts. There's a certain discrepancy then between the policy participant responses in terms of an alignment of what is thought, what is known, what is practiced, and what is actually within policy documents. There's a mandatory music is noted in the Atlantic Arts Education Curriculum, which came out about 2 decades ago and has remained a foundational document for curriculum. And I think this goes well with the Atlantic province's traditions. For as long as I remember growing up in Prince Edward Island, that music is mandated at that elementary level, and minutes are defined for that level. And how many minutes? Again, most provinces outline specific amounts of time in the curricular and program of studies for music. Those that did not include were British Columbia and Ontario. And in the Atlantic provinces, we noticed that music teacher responses closely mirrored the provincially mandated instructional time. So there seemed to be a knowledge at the music teacher level that yes, this is the mandated time, and it aligned with policy. So part 3 really continued to emerge, interestingly, and so in terms of, so what are we going to recommend? How can we make this document a living and breathing, evolving document? And how can it be helpful for future researchers as they go forward? So we came up with 10 categories, and with each category, you'll see in the document, there are questions and ideas to go within each category. We concluded we've learned a lot, that it is an ongoing process, and that again, education was never designed to be a one-size-fits-all model for Canada. And I would say since Confederation, if we look historically at what was valued at the time. We also realized there's a complexity involved in the decision-making processes because of the multiple decision-making makers, rather, from government levels to school levels to university levels to the school, to the principals, to the teachers themselves when they close the door and they will decide what they're going to do. So that also it brings a certain level of complexities, not negative or positive, but something to think about. The 2 overarching themes then, this alignment between practice and policies, we think this can be further investigated. It does vary across and within provinces. And I think that there's a continued need to examine about this mandatory music instruction, and can it be guaranteed in every school in Canada? That is a vast mandate, critical that it be investigated and infiltrated, if I should say, or implemented. But again, I think it needs further consideration. So I've just given the 10 categories here. And again, in the document, you will see questions and ideas within each document. This alignment issue we've already addressed, the notion of rural and urban settings, resources, what's the reality of things, what are the challenges and how do they differ, how are they the same at all, the requirements to deliver music, who teaches music and who says who should teach music. For those of us who are firm believers it should be a music specialist, I think that needs to continue to be advocated. This notion of what is involved in pre-service music teacher preparation and professional development. The time allotted, can we get more consistency even within provinces, within the practice, regardless of what the policy says? The notion of indigenization and decolonization is addressed in part 1 in the document, but that needs further investigation, as we know. This role of technology, particularly now that we've gone through COVID and technology has been a larger part of our classrooms, what stays, what doesn't, why not. The notion of advocacy in music ed organizations continues to be critical. What physical space is allocated for music? I know in Ontario, music teachers have lost space through COVID, and it's disheartening to see a backward slide in some of the schools, but not all. And then other kinds of questions that might emerge as these various categories hopefully become reasons to look at the document and to consider research. So that's all I have. Angela, thank you again for the introduction and for everybody being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Betty Ann. And I really want to take this moment to share with everyone that Betty Ann highlighted that the Canadian mosaic of music education is extraordinarily complex. And as Adam and our other researchers and Eric and I tried to make sense of what we were finding across the country, I want to really highlight that Betty Ann was our anchor and our rock. During the process of gathering data for this report, she was the still and steady hand. And there were times, I confess, we were completely lost. And Betty Ann, you became our North Star. So thank you so much for your strength and your clarity. We couldn't have managed all of this without you. So hard.
Thank you, Angela. It was a team effort, let me tell you. There were many late night emails.
There were indeed. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to my friend and colleague, Larry O'Farrell. Larry O'Farrell and I have worked on the board of the Canadian Network for Arts and Learning for, I think, coming up to 2 decades now. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to work with Larry, who has the same passion that we all have for music education in the broader context of arts education across this country and around the world. And Larry's going to talk a little bit about how the findings of this study align and complement the greater Canadian arts education landscape. Over to you, my friend Larry.
Thank you very much, my friend Angela. Very good. I have to begin by congratulating the coalition and Adam and the team, of course, for this very much needed study. The vast amount of data and the sophistication of the analysis will make it possible, for future researchers to develop specific proposals to reclaim lost ground in the justification and implementation of music education across the country. Out of the remarkable depth of the report, one important theme has seized my attention. This is the evident discontinuity between what provincial and territorial curricula endorse for music education and the arts, and the actual amount of time and resources devoted to these subjects at the regional and local levels, sometimes amounting to none at all, and at best applied inconsistently within a given system. If learning to make music is essential for some of our children, why is it not deemed essential for all? I see this issue as a reflection of a relatively recent trend in education, broadly speaking, and of music education specifically. Music has long been an important element in quality education, certainly from the Middle Ages and early modern periods in Europe and its colonies. Listening to and, very importantly, learning to make music was central to the formation of an educated person. Of course, for centuries, this was an elitist privilege, open only to the aristocracy and the wealthy middle class, indeed, as was formal schooling in general. But then, taking a cue from 18th century philosophy and 19th century experiments, and coinciding with the rise of mandatory public school attendance, the progressive education or new education movement brought with it a new student-centered pedagogy, wherein music and the arts were seen to engage students in a process of learning by doing. Rote learning was to be replaced by discovery and experience. Using my generation as an example, entering school at the mid-20th century mark of the 20th, we were taught music regularly by trained specialists. We participated in a range of what was, I think at that time, mainly choral lessons and performances. And I remember that a basic qualification for teaching kindergarten at that time was a grade 8 diploma in piano. So music was so integral at that time. So then what happened to the progressive education movement? I like to blame the 1980s. This was the point at which the pendulum started to swing back towards rote learning. Why? Because inspired by industrial quality control methods, what mattered most in our school systems, in spite of the best effort, intentions, and sometimes submissive or subversive methods of our teachers, was standardization of learning outcomes. The dreaded standardized test took over with a vengeance. Subjects like music that were not represented in the test were shoved aside, or as far aside as the more idealistic official curricula would permit. Lip service became an inadvertent agent in the process of devaluing music and the arts. This report that we're celebrating shows clearly where the problems lie, in time allotments, space availability, and even the qualifications of teachers responsible for music. Without adequate time, space, and knowledge, how can an effective music program take root? What remains to be determined is how we can effectively counter this discouraging trend. I believe that we have to roll up our collective sleeves and find a new way of articulating, and I think I'm really in sync with what I've been hearing from the previous speakers, that we have to find a new way of articulating the value of music and the arts in the context of our contemporary world. It's not the 19th century anymore. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has described the ultimate goal of education as individual and collective well-being. The World Health Organization, WHO, sees an important role for the arts in health and well-being, and is working on that now at an advocacy level. I suggest we begin there with the concept of well-being. Certainly, as we emerge from the shadow of the pandemic, well-being is top of mind, and mental health is known to have been compromised among the general public and especially our children. Let's initiate a conversation about how learning to make and appreciate music of all kinds can contribute to a personal and collective well-being. We may begin to find an answer there. After all, everything is connected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larry. Larry, over the last two decades, has taught me personally to never give up. Through our work together with the Canadian Network for Arts and Learning and also the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, Larry has never, ever given up and endlessly contributes not only his time, but his expertise, which you have just witnessed at this moment, time and time again. And Larry, he's humble. He personally reached out to the World Health Organization in an effort to put Canada on the map regarding the positive impact of music and the arts on mental health. So Larry, thank you for being part of this panel. And I also want to say one of the privileges of working with this panel and all of the organizations that contributed so endlessly to this research. It's the first time in my career where so many organizations in the music sector have come together with a common goal. And we're hearing from so many of these organizations today. And it's just thrilling because I believe personally the only way we're going to move this agenda forward is together. This brings us to part two of our event this evening or this afternoon out here in Victoria for Adam and Vancouver for me. And this is are thinking about rebuilding post-pandemic. The whole world is thinking about how are we going to rebuild post-pandemic, but it goes without saying that music and the arts have been devastated by this pandemic, and we need to be thoughtful, reflective, constructive, creative, and inspirational as we move forward. It's my pleasure to introduce you to one of our partners, Nick Godso, who is he is the manager of programs and education of the amazing Music Counts organization. And then we'll be hearing from our other partner, Canadian the Canadian Music Educators Association, with its vice president, Jeff Weaver. So on to you, Nick.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thank you for having me tonight. And congratulations to Adam and Eric and Angela and Betty and everyone else involved. The elephants were herded successfully. The report is done. You should all feel very proud. I know it was quite the undertaking. And thank you to all the teachers that are tuning in tonight on an evening. I know it's been quite a couple of years, so it's really wonderful for you to take the time to tune in. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing every day. As a lot of folks have mentioned already, the really terrific thing about this study is it lays such a clear foundation for future research. And one of the biggest things that it's confirmed, like a lot of folks have alluded to already, is that music ed is really all over the place in Canada. So it kind of helped confirm that, which I think we all knew to an extent. It helped us really help that become clear. And it also helped us understand what the big gaps are. And I think that that's worth taking stock of in this moment. And as we're talking about the need to rebuild music education, I think we almost need to think about it as reimagining what music education can and should look like in Canada. I know that there's a huge urge to want to return to business as usual after the devastation that the pandemic has wrought. It's set us back in so many ways. And I know there's an instinct to want to go back to where we were, but I think that we can shoot higher than that. I think that we can do better than that because as Larry, you said, you know, we're in a new reality. We're in a contemporary reality right now. So I think we can build a culture of music education that really meets our students where we're at. So when we're building music education back, we must openly question the inherent prioritization of some musics and cultures over others that are firmly baked into the culture of institutional music and music education in Canada. You know, when we think about specialist music educators and their educational experience, you know, we need to be really frank about ourselves about the tremendous emphasis on Western music that go into these training programs. And, you know, certainly progress is being made, but there's no question that the emphasis on Western approaches is still there. And we need to sit with that. And we need to think about what that means and what that's perpetuating for the culture of music education in Canada. So when we're thinking about our role as national entities and advocates for music education, I think something that we can do is prioritize really representing a more fluid and inclusive understanding of what constitutes music education and what constitutes a music teacher. And through this very intentional representation, we can move music ed forward in a way that doesn't leave any approach to music education or any young person in Canada feeling excluded or left behind. And a personal thing that happened to me that sent this really home for me when I first started working at Music Counts. You know, we have our grant programs and we do phone calls to schools and communities all across the country, you know, conducting outreach, letting folks know that there are these funding opportunities that exist. So I remember once I called a community center in northern Manitoba. And I was like, we have this grant program, you know, for music education. You can apply for whatever instruments you need. And it was an Indigenous community. And the lady on the phone was like, oh, you know, we don't have a band or an orchestra. We just do traditional drumming. So that grant program probably isn't for us. And that was kind of a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, you know, of course it's for you. Like, of course you can apply. But I think that these narratives of music education that can be perpetuated can make music education look like a particular thing to some people, when we know that it's so much more But I think in this moment, we need to make sure that when we're talking about music education, when we're visualizing it, we're not just showing kids in orchestras, kids in concert bands, we're showing kids playing steel pan drums, kids holding iPads, kids, building indigenous drums. And I think through that representation, we can really build a really wonderful path forward. The final point I'd like to make is with regards to music and careers. Obviously, the economy of music has been completely challenged in ways that are unprecedented. So at the onset of the pandemic, I was talking to teachers all across the country, and a lot of them were talking about what they were referring to as a crisis of viability for their secondary elective music programs. They were having a hard time encouraging parents to encourage their students or their children to enroll in elective music classes at the secondary level, because on the surface, the economy of music was devastated. Concert halls were empty, tours had stopped, but in reality, what you see and hear when you engage with music, as we all know, is just truly the tip of the music workforce iceberg. And I think that, when we think about, again, the post-secondary training programs for our specialist teachers in Canada, there is a startling lack of prioritization about, the economics of music, the industry of music. I went through 7 years of post-secondary music, and I graduated from all of that not knowing what a record label was, not knowing what royalties really were, not knowing what music publishing was. And not only are these essential concepts for being a responsible consumer of music in Canada, these are fields that employ thousands of people in this country, jobs that are in music, but the love for music that is sparked in music class, that's what gets people into those jobs. So I think that may actually be a really interesting advocacy tool as we think ahead to how we can promote music education, is, making parents and communities and decision makers aware that, there are very viable career outcomes that are beyond a sound that comes out of an instrument or a sound that comes out of your body. There's so much there. So I think we can really foster awareness about that pipeline. And I think that'll be really helpful, particularly in a secondary music setting. So all of that to say, I just think, we should visualize the music education culture that we want to see for ourselves, and build on some of the really amazing work that's already been done, and the foundation for which has been laid by this study.
Thank you so much. There's always got to be one time on a Zoom call when you think you're unmuted and you are muted. So that was my moment. Nick, thank you so much. Nick, you have brought to this committee and to this body of research perspectives that many of us just do not have. Your perspective is very broad, and it's very inclusive and diverse. And I want to thank you personally for the energy and the passion and the courage and strength that you've brought to this study, and the new lenses through which you asked us to look. And I think that the health of the study has been guided by that passion which you bring. So thank you so much. And also to all of Music Counts, because Music Counts is, I think this is the first time that the coalition and at CMEA and the network and some of the rest of us worked together this way. And I'll repeat what I said before. I think it's high time that those silos come down and we work together towards common goals. And those common goals don't have to be united. Those common goals can be exactly what you just suggested, Nick, which is, what is your vision of creative music education or creative music making in this country? And then how can we together facilitate that, so that all Canadians have access to music. So thank you for the energy you brought to this, Nick. And we're going to go over now to Jeff Weaver, who's representing CMEA, Canadian Music Education Association. He's the vice president, but he comes with a wealth of experience in music making and music teaching. And David, I'm not leaving you to the end, but I knew you might be a bit late, so I'm going to have you close for us. So over to Jeff and your perspectives on the foundation that this study has set, and what is post-pandemic music education to you and CMEA?
Well, thank you. Just before we get started, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees Nation, on whose traditional territories I live, learn, and make music on every day. Hello from Victoria. I'd like to also express my thanks to the coalition, Adam, Betty, and everyone else who was involved with the study. I think this is an amazing study, and we've got some awesome data that's come out of it that we now get to use. So I was asked, how do we move forward past a pandemic and make music education better than it was? And then I text Kirsten and said, oh my gosh, that's the biggest question I've ever had to answer in my entire life, but I'll give it a shot. And I dove into the study and read every page from back to front. And what it did was paint a picture for me with a couple of key ingredients that I think that we can overcome, but there are some pretty significant challenges from coast to coast. I think one of the major first topics that we should discuss is advocacy on some sort of a whole new level that needs to happen within and with all the music associations, and stakeholders. Each province needs to engage with ministries of education and show the holes in music education in each province to the ministries. Indigenous music education can no longer be ignored across our country. Lack of curricular requirements, Indigenous ways of knowing and doing are a huge part of reconciliation. And if music education can be a leader in this work, we will elevate our citizens and have the opportunity to change the cycle and path of future generations. The music curriculum needs to be updated in so many provinces. I love the infographic that states which song was popular when your curriculum was updated. Ace of Base was probably my favorite. I think that was that PEI perhaps? What will each province do to initiate change? That's the biggest question. Music education mandatory in every province would be an amazing changing event for Canadians. Every music education association and stakeholder needs to start campaigning to facilitate music education being made mandatory in every province. It astounded me that it wasn't in every province, or that it wasn't as important as I thought it should be. The power of education, I believe, is the parents and students that they teach. Music educators make long and lasting relationships with students and families. These are our allies. These are our future Canadian music advocates. They will change the future of music education. We have the data, we have recommendations, we have knowledge, and that is power to make change. Often as educators, we run our concerts, teach music, and do not realize the impact our classes have on the students we teach. How wide can we cast our net? I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure what the nitty-gritty details of all these items that I've brought forward today are, but I think that we have the tools in place to start making change. So, book a meeting with your education boards and point out the inadequacies. Start somewhere. Thank you so much for letting me speak today.
Thank you, Jeff, for that clear and articulate call to action. The call to action is to get in touch with your government representatives, with your school board leaders, and affect change. The time just to talk about this is over. It's now time for action. And a special thank you to Jeff and CMEA for their ongoing support, not only throughout this study, but through all the years that we have partnered to meet our common goals. I also thank you, Jeff, for highlighting that on the Coalition website, we have an amazing visual, a map of Canada that is so effective in introducing you to the curriculum requirements of each province and territory. And yes, the music that was playing at the time that the curriculum was updated is in fact its own music history study, and so effective. And I hope that Stacy will post. I know I've been looking through the chat, and there have been some questions which Stacy has been responding to. I'm really happy about that. And we'll have time for questions before we end today. So thanks, Jeff. And now for David Piretz La Rochelle, our Francophone Vice Chair of the Coalition for Music Education, who was, I think, involved in parent-teacher interviews this evening and almost didn't make it, but you made it, and we're so happy that you're here. here. David came to the coalition as one of our Youth for Music ambassadors when he was a youth. Now, David to me is still a youth, but he's now a full member a full member of our coalition board and representing the Francophone component of this wonderful country. Over to you, David.
Merci beaucoup, Angela. Bonsoir, bonjour à tous. I'm very humble in speaking to you this evening from Montreal. Yes, after my parent-teacher interviews. Very much looking forward to March break and the glass of wine that is waiting for me after this. Yes, everything is connected, and I think music connects us. It's connecting us right now. However, I feel sad at seeing icons instead of feeling human warmth. Sorry. And I think it's time for advocacy. It's time to rethink how we do things. And I think music, of course, is an angular piece of all of that. Not only it connects us in the real world, in the physical world, but I think also something that is not in the study is that, we know the benefits. It's scientifically proven, also by very prominent Canadian researchers, that there are benefits not only for youth but also for the wise, for ongoing music practice, not only for the development of the youth and their well-being, but also a healthy aging, which is something that I think has to be very important in our advocacy moving forward. And most prominently in these very conflictual times, science has demonstrated that group music making is actually a vector for increased altruism. So I think that's a powerful tool that we should be using. Also, to go on about what Nick was saying earlier, this is a landscape of music education in Canada, but that landscape has been changing. And I think we have to ask ourselves the question of, did our educational system change as much as the landscape? And not just that, how's the job market changing and evolving? And Nick said it so well, the economy of music. I heard that, and the music teacher in me cringed a little bit. Every day I go to work, I'm not training professional musicians. No, I'm training human beings, future citizens. And, like Nick said, there's not just one outcome out of this. No, and I think we have to rethink the school and its place in the educational system with, the changing job market in place. I work in Montreal, and in Montreal we have a lot of video game industry players, Ubisoft and all of them, and I see their job postings, and really what they're looking for now is not so much having a degree and having done your math and your physics. They're looking for creative thinking, cooperation, being a team player, problem solving, having people skills, listening skills. And all I see is like, this is arts education, this is music right there. And yet, in my province, music is not mandatory at any grade level. Okay, so there are kids that grow up in Quebec with not a minute of music instruction. And in the biggest board here in Montreal, the Montreal School Board, in elementary schools, where under half of them have a music specialist. So I'm wondering if there's a disconnect there. So I think it's very clear with this study that there is. And just to finish, just one more thought that's also linked to what's going on right now. Canada is probably going to be opening some doors to some refugees, okay, and it has been for many years. And I think we have to think of music as a vector for integration of immigrants, integration of refugees. And also, I think, you know, it's part of our foundation of our culture. You know, when I travel and, you know, I say that I'm Canadian, you know, I've been to Southeast Asia, and it's like, oh, I'm Canadian, and then I say, yeah, Celine Dion, and they go, oh, Celine Dion, you know, and you know, that might be a little bit of a cheesy example, but you know, our culture is so musically rich in Canada. And you know, one last thing I'm thinking about this advocacy and moving forward with this is, where are our Canadian champions? Where is Celine? We have to get Celine to support us in this advocacy movement. And I want to finish by saying thank you for having me, let me speak briefly, and thanks for everybody who was attending this. I feel like you know, we all have this shared interest and this common goal, and this study is a very strong leap forward. So thank you to everyone involved.
Thank you, David, for your commitment to music education. As I said earlier, with regards to Kirsten, you, who's the chair of the Coalition for Music Education, you, David, you walk your talk. Every day you're in the music education classroom. You know exactly what we're talking about here. And that's so important, to be in the grassroots of music education. And I really appreciate the enthusiasm, the passion, and the intelligence that you bring to the Coalition for Music Education. And it's also extraordinarily important that you are the Francophone voice for us. We need more voices in our circle, informing us about what the importance of music making and music education is in every region of this very multicultural country. And David, you perfectly brought us full circle, because I opened today after the Indigenous land acknowledgement. I acknowledged that today was a dark day for this world, with such hatred and war starting, and that we have a role as musicians, music educators, arts educators, and a belief that creativity produces kindness and compassion, empathy, and attachment. More than ever now, we may have to make sure that our schools provide that foundation. And you're right, there's going to be an influx of refugees and newcomers to this country. Let us make sure that music reflects that mosaic in this country, and also holds all of those people in a place of love and kindness. Our part 3 now is open to everybody on this call. Our part 3 is your questions, your opportunity for questions and further discussion. I know there's been quite a bit of chat. I think we have about 70 people or more on this call. So to make it easier for Stacy and for myself, if you could use the raised hand reaction so that we know you have something to ask, that would help us. Thank you very much. All you arts educators, you always have so much to say. I'm sure there's something you want to share with us. Questions, comments, reflections. What's happening where you are right now? Oh, here's a question for David.
Yeah, so the question from Louise about the reference for altruism, I don't have it on hand right now, but I will definitely get it to you. And it's altruism is the word, just to make sure that we're clear on that. And if that is of interest to anybody, I'm gonna shamelessly promote to you a very sympathique book that's written by a prominent Canadian researcher called Isabelle Peretz. And she published it in 2018. It's called, Apprendre la musique, nouvelle des neurosciences. Now it's translated in English, I can't remember the title, but it's very slim, it's very digest, and it debunks a whole bunch of myths about learning music from, slightly before birth all the way to the end of life. And she addresses that, Louise. So that's you can get your reference there, but I will send it to you.
and David is being humble. That is his mother, who I feel has done an excellent and stellar job of raising a wonderful son who is very passionate about creativity, music, and the arts.
Merci, Angela.
This is your time, everybody, to get onto this recorded Zoom call, your one moment of fame. Here we go.
I'll jump in. Annabelle Cohen in PEI.
Hi,
I know-
Annabelle. It's been a while.
Know quite a few of the people here, and working with several wonderful people who are here today on the issue of access to music education in Canada. But I'm so impressed by the document. I had a chance to skim it, and I also have seen the data. And it really is in a form that can be used by researchers, and it provides a wonderful foundation for a tremendous amount of further information to come out of this. I was astounded looking at, for example, the question about Indigenous music in an open-ended question like that, when you have 2,700 different answers of how it is used. And I was surprised that very few responses were none. I mean, it was encouraging just to look at that, but the various ways. So there's a wealth of data there. But I'd also like to say that it is impressive to see such a wonderful document come out of a group of people. I don't know how you did it, but I do know how, because you're all musicians, or the majority of you are, and you know how to work with people, and how I think it's a testament to the value of music training. That might be one of the outcomes of how you're able to work together in harmony. And the issues of music is good for you, and it helps you in your senior years and all of this. I think the intrinsic value of music as a subject unto itself that makes us human is something that you cannot argue against, where these other data are questionable. You know, the idea that singing together makes you a better person, I have to challenge that idea when we see how singing together was used in Germany during the war to not make you a better person necessarily, maybe to bring solidarity. We know that Putin can barely play the piano, but he can, and he can relate to people through music. So I think we have to be careful about some things, but I can't take away the intrinsic value of music. That's all. So congratulations to you all, and I know your data is going to be very valuable to others.
Well, thank you, Dr. Cohen. It's so good to see you again. And I know the studies that you're leading right now are going to be most valuable. And if we can align these data, we have more tools for our advocacy together. Kristen Reardon McClellan, I see your hand.
Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you. And I want to just say a huge thank you to everybody involved in the study. What a absolutely groundbreaking and fantastic initiative that we can all be proud of, and we are all indebted to you, and so thankful for the work and the expertise and the professionalism that you've all brought to this. I've been lucky enough to kind of watch this from behind the scenes here in BC with the Coalition for Music Education in British Columbia, and it's just so exciting to finally see everything come to light here and go public, if you will. And so as I'm listening and thinking and getting really inspired as we're talking about being stronger together, and how we are truly connected right now across the country for the cause of music education. If I could be vulnerable and really honest for a minute and and admit one thing that always worries me is how we can be contemporary and innovative and modern and woke, if you will, and with the times, without abandoning our tried and true traditions. And how can we foster a profession that focuses on the and instead of the or? How do we learn to not give up our Western classical music traditions, because we can agree that there are many values in our traditional forms of music making in Western culture, but how do we find that end? And as a white person who grew up in that Western classical tradition and was trained that way, I will admit that it's an ongoing educational process, even for me, to figure out, how do I do that in my own teaching? But I would imagine there are others that feel that way as well. And so as advocacy leaders across Canada, how do we provide that kind of professional development for teachers, especially young teachers, to figure out how to be the and instead of the or? I also think it's really easy to get caught up in we have to do it the new way. It has to decolonize. It has to be out with the old and with the new. And while I fully 100,000% support decolonization and indigenization of music education, how can we truly be representative of reconciliation by bringing together and treating it as an and so my question on that I'm kind of hypothetically putting out to all of us here is, how do we provide that training, and how do we help others to perhaps realize the value of the and?
Thanks, Kirsten. There's actually two questions that just came up that align with your question. Taylor McGilvray says, myself and a couple of other pre-service teachers are wondering if someone could speak to how this will affect teachers at the beginning of their careers. And then Gabrielle Smith, Decolonizing the Music Room is a really wonderful resource to be working on this question. And Sarah Campbell, we're sort of trying to tackle that in PEI, speaking as an instructor at Holland College, where we have a contemporary program. And then there's a link to that. Thank you, Gabrielle. Is there anybody else who wants to speak to this and question? Because I think it speaks to what Adam Kahn said earlier today, which is, we really do have to look at how we are teaching teachers and what shifts do we have to make. Louise.
Hi, I think this is a great subject of discussion, and I certainly don't have anywhere close to any or all of the answers. I myself, I'm a teaching artist. I work a lot within the educational system, but I am not an actual in-class teacher 100% of the time. I also work with a lot of artist rosters, and I just like to suggest that there's no one person who can do everything. And if there's a way that we can work together, which is a message I've heard from multiple of the speakers, then together we can help move things forward. And in some of my artist rosters, I have teachers who come to me asking, it's like, I don't know Indigenous ways of knowing. I don't know Indigenous music practices. Is there anyone on your roster who could help us with this? And so I can refer people so that they can bring in the expertise into their classroom. So I think it's a learning process with all of us. And I think part of the process is to recognize that no one person can know everything. And that helps, I think, to build on the and, in the sense of, I have my own music tradition, which is very definitely rooted in Western classical music. Somebody else has another tradition, and we can work together in order to provide the best kind of music education to the students that we're working with, if we work together, really.
Thanks, Louise, and thanks for all the support you've given the Canadian Network for Arts and Learning and other organizations to whom you contribute. Louise also raises a really interesting element that we haven't raised yet this afternoon, this evening, and that is the powerful contribution of artist educators and artist educators who have been provided the tools to work really beautifully in partnership with teachers who are seeking greater resources. And I think that that's something that's been understated in our conversations in recent years. Thank you, Louise. And Kirsten.
Thank you, Angela. I just wanted to respond to the questions, if I may, and not in my hat as chair necessarily, but as a music educator. And especially, to all of the new to the profession music educators, I think my piece of advice would be always put relationships first. And by that, what I mean is it's not necessarily about what precisely I'm teaching or covering in my class. But what's important to me as a music educator is that I am sharing my intrinsic love for music, and I'm sharing what music means to me and what it brings to my life and my experiences to my classroom. And in essence, my goal is to motivate my students and inspire them to begin their own musical journeys. And their journeys should not be the same as mine, nor will they necessarily have the same love of certain styles of music that I do, or bring to my classroom the same cultural experiences or backgrounds that I have. But the one thing that connects us all is a mutual love for learning about music, for making music, and for coming together as a music community in my classroom. And I think that if we stop thinking so much about checking off all the boxes, but be more in the moment. So often, trust that your students will know. My students will come to me and amaze me with their requests about music they want to learn about, music that they want to play. Many of my students, I teach at a school that is kindergarten through to grade 9. And I just feel so blessed to be able to be with them on this journey, because they teach me oftentimes more than I actually think I teach them. So put the relationship first, be authentic, be true with them, listen to where their interests are, but more importantly, focus on helping them get in touch with their inner musician. And I think a lot of these questions will answer themselves. And I often think that in my next career, I would love to write a book, because the other thing I will tell you, now I've been in this business about, we'll say over 20 years now. Every time I'm presented with a new concept in education, or a new buzzword, or a new approach, or a new resource, every single time I can honestly look the Department of Education, look my administration in the face and say, but we always have done it that way in music. Because I really do think that the music classroom is the ultimate example of how education can really, really work best. And that is through building relationships with your students, first and foremost.
Thanks, Kirsten, and you do that very well, and you model that for us all the time. Your leadership here is really inspirational. And I think what Kirsten is saying, I want to validate the fact that we want to support emerging teachers, whatever we can do to support teachers who are inspired to enter the career of music education. Don't be disillusioned. Be the next generation of music education leaders. We need you. Douglas, you've got your hand up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Doug McCauley, and I direct a large community music program, about 200 kids in a community band program. And I've been the director for, it's coming up to 30 years of my 3-year contract. I don't know how that happened, but the big thing is it's still an enormous amount of fun, and there are still so many ideas. The idea of being able to, we're talking about teachers at the beginning of their career. I know a lot of teachers who are well into their career who are having a lot of challenges with how much their program is changing, how much the demographics of their program are changing. When I started with my program, about 80 to 90% of the young people in this program were born at the local hospital. They were born here in Canada, in the community. Now that's reversed. Now it's well over 80% that are coming from other countries, a huge variety of other countries, pretty much every continent, and many, many languages. And I work very hard to make sure that their music is reflected in our concerts and in our programming. And that's been a big part of my philosophy all the way along. I would also, speaking of recommending books, if any of you have read anything by Dr. Peter Boonschaft from Hofstra University, Peter Boonschaft wrote a series of 3 books, Teaching Music with Purpose, Teaching Music with Passion, and Teaching Music with Promise. I've had to actually rebuy the books because I've destroyed them going through them on a repeated basis, and they're my gift. So I've had quite a number of students from my program who've gone into music education, and I give them a set of those books every time. They are very inspirational from every perspective and wonderful resources. The other thing that we've done with my program is we've commissioned a series of works with our local First Nation, the Squamish Nation. We started the program back in 2018. I asked the elders if they would consider granting us some music or introducing us to families who are caretakers of particular songs, and if we could perhaps translate those into works for symphonic band. And we've now done 3 pieces. And it's all been done correctly. The families get the royalties. The wonderful Canadian composer, Robert Buckley, has transmitted them into works for symphonic band, and we perform them together. And that's been an extraordinary experience. I asked my students after the first year, the first performance of the first work, Gathering of Eagles, the end of that year, I always do a survey, an anonymous survey with them, where I ask them, what worked this year? What didn't work this year? What was your favorite part of the year? What would you like to see in the program? And 99% of the musicians, and there's 92 of them in the symphonic band, said their favorite part of the year was having Bob Baker and the Eagle Song drummers and dancers in the room, and the interactions that happened, and the questions and discussions that happened that were absolutely amazing and eye-opening for everyone. A simple question from one of my French horn players, very Western thinking. So how did you come to write this song? And Bob Baker said, I didn't write it, I received it. There are no new songs. We receive songs when the time is right. And the follow-up question from the same student was, oh, so you don't own it then? And he responded, well, you can't own a song any more than you can own the earth or the sea. The eye-popping reaction from the students was just extraordinary, having these thoughts, these ideas presented to them. Just incredible. So we've done a lot of that kind of work. So you really have to do some outreach. Now, with my program, I'm very lucky that we have financial resources that a lot of times the school doesn't, that we can use to commission works. But those works are always published, and so we're providing them as a resource to everyone. And we're currently working with 3 composers from 3 different cultural communities for new works for the next 3 years. So this is going to become an ongoing program for us where we're commissioning new works. So, I mean, everybody has to find their own way. I have a former student who's in a small town in BC who is dealing with an entirely different situation than I deal with here, and reaching out for advice all the time. I think it's those of us, somehow I have become the grand old man of the band, and those of us who have been at it a while, we really have to share whenever we can what we've learned over time and how we continue to adapt and change, which we have to do, or our programs become very stale and sad very quickly. But anyways, I hope that's helpful, and do get those. I'm going to put them in the chat, but just to be sure, the book's by Peter Boonschaft, Peter L. Boonschaft from Hofstra University, one of my great mentors. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, all of you who put this together. It's such a timely and necessary study. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. And yes, there have been a lot of questions around the name of the book. So if you could put that into the chat, that would be great. And Adam Kahn, I believe you had your hand up.
Thanks, Angela. I just wanted to remind folks, I think it's really important that we recognize that, once this report was finished, I just kind of moved on, and now I'm teaching access, diversity, equity, and inclusion at the university, and I'm working with Choral Canada on their strategic plan with LIT. And I think there's some things that we can borrow from that related to this. I think it's often that folks and those of you who know me, I'm a choral conductor. I have the same Western traditional conservatory training as many of you. And I think one of the things that automatically happens is this fear that that we're thinking that we're in cancel culture, that we're thinking that band, choir, and orchestra now are passé, and we're throwing them out the window. And I think that there's never been that case. I think it's a case of, if you look at that, many of you have seen that question of three people, one tall, middle, and short, looking over the baseball diamond. And we're talking about not equality here. We're talking about equity. And the fact that the equity is that the music of those Eurocentric performance, ensembles performance base has always been the have always had the highlight or the spotlight. And what we're looking at is everything else, the othering, right? That's been happening, that we're trying to raise and uplift so that they're all on equal viewing platforms, if you would say. And so if you haven't seen Megan Bowler's Pedagogy of Discomfort, I think one of the things that we can take away from that, into the world about talking about racism and sexism, I think one of the things that we can take away from that is that when you're feeling discomforted about your curriculum and as a music educator and trying to figure out how you are able to provide a diversity and a spectrum of perspectives, I think feeling discomfort about it at all times is probably a good thing. It's a confirmation that you're probably thinking and being sensitive. And I think, just like Kirsten was saying, I think if we remember it, and I think we all know this, it's about the process. Yet our training is about product driven, right? It's the concert, the festival, the blah, 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 blah. But we also know it's about the process, because that's why we are all music educators. We're a part of that process. So I think it's a question of just refocusing. Maybe it's about the process, and not that product's not important, but it's a byproduct of a beautiful process. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for honoring Ukraine in the beautiful way you have right behind you. It just brings it right back to me and makes me feel like just crying. Cindy.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Rompf, and I am the current past president of the BC Music Educators Association. I'm also our LSA Local Specialist Association president here in the Greater Victoria School District. Thank you to everybody who has done this research and worked so hard on it. It's really important work. But my question is, what are you going to do about it now? How are you going to use this research and this information to promote change? In my district last year, I don't know if some of you heard, but we went through major budget cuts, and our district fought tooth and nail against these cuts. They still cut our middle school music program a little bit, but we were able for 1 year to keep our over 100 years string program, our middle school music programs. And it's interesting because everybody here understands the impact of music. We all know this. I was in a meeting recently with somebody from our school district who asked a question, what do you mean by ensembles? And all of us were like, oh my goodness, okay. So with this research, we have to convince these people out there that don't even know what ensembles are. So how do we connect the two, and how do we promote the importance of music education, which we all know here, to these people who are making policy decisions? Thank you.
That is a big question and a really good one. Who would love to respond? I will start by saying we need to stop talking to ourselves and one another and broadening our circle of influence. Other people?
Angela, I wonder, I noted that Dr. Eric Favreau is in the room with us tonight. And Dr. Eric Favreau, for those of you who don't know, is the past chair of the coalition. And he is one of two people, along with Lynn Tucker, whom I spoke about earlier this evening, who are actually taking this information and now looking to create some change and affect policy changes in music education policy in Canada. So I'd love it if Eric would say a few words about that. And Cindy, just before I hand it over to Eric, for those of you who may not know this about Cindy, I think she understates the impact that she had on making sure that those programs weren't canceled. She reached out and formed the first Amos group, which is a group of people who are invested, parents and community stakeholders who were invested in music education within her school district, and managed to get the table turned. And that is no small feat. So I thank you, Cindy, because your inspiration has also spearheaded. Cindy has been working with another one of our board members, Kirk Wasmer, to look at how we can make the Amos model, this idea of getting more community stakeholders involved in affecting real change in music education and supporting the music education programs at their local levels so that they don't end up in crisis. But yeah, Cindy, you did some amazing work there. But I'm wondering, Eric, if you're here, would you like to speak to the Policy Summit?
Sure, and I see Patrick is on this call as well. Patrick is co-chairing it with Lynn and myself. We 2 years ago, when we were in the midst of the pandemic, the coalition board had a reflective period of time over 3 weeks when we looked at what we were doing, what we were successful at, what we needed to change. And one of the things we came to realize is that the coalition began 30 years ago in 1992 as an organization that wanted to affect change in music education in this country because programs were under threat at that time. Ironically, I was already 20 plus years into my career by then. This is my 51st year in music education. And although I'm retired, I'm still an advocate for it. But at when we did our strategy sessions in 2020, we thought we needed to come back to advocacy. And as Angela said, we had to stop talking to ourselves and start looking beyond those with whom we communicate regularly on a daily basis and try to affect change at a different level. And so we formed an advocacy committee and then struck a plan for how to proceed in the future. One of the ideas we had, thanks to Patrick, was to host a national music education policy summit. So we formed a committee for that, and we now have this all planned out. And this event is going to take place in October 14th to 16th of this year. And we have pre-session events taking place the last weekend in April 29th and 30th. And this is a cross-sectoral conversation about what the ecosystem looks like in Canada. In a way, it builds on the study that we're talking about tonight. And how can we proceed now to affect change that really meets the needs of our students in a contemporary world? And how can we work more closely together, breaking down those silos that have been so restrictive over the last many, many years. And so, Cindy, I thank you for bringing that up because we really do have to start talking to those decision makers. And I happen to be one of them at one time, working in a large school district and later at the Ministry of Education. And I always found the best way to stay on the side of those decision makers was to always offer solutions to problems because they knew they didn't understand the field of music education. I knew they didn't understand the field of music education. And so I always tried to find ways to communicate that with them at a level that they could create a buy-in to programs and provide solutions to challenges that they were facing when they were making decisions. And there's no doubt that school districts right across this country are constantly challenged by some really tough times. And I think the future is looking rather grim now with the economy the way it is. So we have to work with these people and not always criticize them for making the wrong decisions, but try to show them what the right path is and how important music is to ourselves as citizens of a Western society that values music and that promotes inclusiveness and equity and diversity and recognizes the fact that music brings us all together in this world that we live in. So thank you for that. And yeah, thanks, Kirsten, for your compliment.
Thank you, Eric. Eric and I have been working together side by side, partners in crime, for about 3 decades now, if not a little bit longer. And he's always one to inspire those who are around him. Thank you, Eric, for always being inspirational. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Very soon.
And I see Jillian has a hand up. I think this will be our last comment and question for this evening.
Oh, thank you. Great to hear and see the faces and voices tonight. Eric, I just wanted to jump off a little bit what you said, and also to go back to honor some of Adam's thoughts that he offered into the space as well about change and responding to the needs of our students. As you referenced that, Eric, and our changing environment, our changing world, and Cindy, I can hear that in your plea as well, to think about how we can lift into the spaces those traditional music programs that have been part of our tapestry for many years. And I wonder if it's an and we might think about together. The curriculum, and I'll go back to that what Adam was talking about, the curriculum really does say only 3 things. It says students will use the creative process, students will use the critical analysis process, and we'll explore forms and cultural context. And that is the same for the grades 1 right through 8. Sorry, I just have to turn off my camera for just 1 second. So honoring that voice, I think that I wanted to just bring forward my gratitude to Patrick for introducing me to Dr. Ruben Gazdembeed Fernandez. And he has a really important quote that's shifted not only the work, all of the work that we're doing in our York Region District, but really has changed my life to think about how the arts really can be more inclusive. He said, the focus has been on how the arts, or that which is called the arts, presumably challenges racism and encourages social justice, with very little attention to how the opposite is also the case. And I wanted to think about the and that we might find together when the curriculum asks us to have students culturally producing their thoughts and feelings and communicating that to the world, when we want to also lift into our spaces, like you said, that Western notion of music, which is band or string or a vocal component. I'm wondering if we could do that and lift and open to a worldview to really be sure that, as Gloria Ladson-Billings says, all instruction is culturally responsive, but the question is, to whose culture is it currently oriented? And I wonder if our gaze needs to widen to a worldview. And I think that would also open our community music programs, our classrooms, all of our programs to really open our arms to more, and rather than convincing someone, inviting them in and honoring their gifts and as a cultural gift into our spaces.
Well said, Jillian, and wonderful words to end our event today. I want to thank all of you for joining us and to remind you that there is a big we here. Please join us at the Coalition for Music Education and all of our partners. Be in touch with us. I'm sure Stacy is going to continue to respond to the questions in the chat room. We only responded to just a few of them. Please be in touch with us. Together we're stronger. I'm going to end with not my own words, but the words by the great Toni Morrison. And I feel that we'll all feel some of these words in our DNA. Right now, this is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. So let's take those words and this study and advocate for what we know is a human right. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Angela. Wonderful job. Very
Thank
much
you, Angela.
appreciated.